Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening up a file that, on the surface, looks like it belongs in the dusty, restricted section of a medieval library.
For sure. The kind of place where you need special gloves just to turn the page.
Exactly. But once you actually start reading the source material we have for today, you realize it's actually a political thriller.
It is.
Yeah.
Mixed with a revolution in how human beings think.
We are talking about a figure who is probably responsible for the most famous catchphrase in the history of logic, and yet his life reads more like an action movie than a philosophy textbook.
Yeah, a lot more. We are talking about William of Ockham.
And Occam's razor, we have all heard it.
Keep it simple. The simplest explanation is usually the right one. All those variations.
You hear it in boardrooms, you hear it in science labs, you hear it on detective shows like CSI.
It's everywhere.
But what struck me, going through the stack of research we have here, is that almost nobody knows the man holding the razor. And the man behind it, William of Ockham, wasn't just sitting in a monastery trimming hedges or, contemplating flowers.
Far from it. This guy was a fugitive. He was a radical.
He spent the prime of his life excommunicated, literally on the run from the Pope.
Hiding out with emperors and dismantling the entire intellectual structure of the Middle Ages while he was at it.
It is a massive story. And to understand him, you have to understand the world he was living in. We're talking about the early 14th century.
Yeah, and it's a world that feels like it's coming apart at the seams. You have the Black Death looming on the horizon. The 100 Years' War is brewing between England and France.
And the Catholic Church, the glue holding Europe together, is tearing itself apart from the inside.
It really is. The papacy has moved from Rome to Avignon in France, and it's seen as corrupt and politically compromised.
And right in the center of all this chaos, holding a stick of dynamite, is William. So our mission today is to find the man behind the maxim. We want to unpack his life, figure out why he's called the Venerable Beginner.
Which is a very strange nickname we absolutely have to get to.
Oh, we will, and understand his complex philosophy called Nominalism.
And we're going to see how that philosophy, believe it or not, paved the way for modern science and even the separation of church and state.
So let's set the scene. We aren't in a university lecture hall yet. We are in a tiny village in Surrey, England, in the late 1200s.
That's right, Occam. It's a small place. William is born there around 1287. Now, looking at the demographics of the time, if you were a bright kid from a village like that and you didn't have a title or a family crest, there was really only one path out of obscurity.
The church.
The church, specifically for William, the Franciscans, the order of Friars Minor.
Also known as the Grey Friars because of their robes.
Exactly. And this choice, becoming a Franciscan, isn't just a career move for William. It's not like choosing a college major. It defines everything that happens to him later.
Because the Franciscans aren't just your average monks, right? They had a very specific brand.
Oh, they were the radicals of their day. Their whole identity was built on the idea of absolute poverty. They were trying to live exactly like Christ and the apostles.
Which meant owning nothing.
Absolutely nothing. They didn't just talk about being humble. They aggressively rejected property and wealth, both individually and as an order.
Which sounds noble, but as we'll see, poverty turns out to be a very dangerous political stance in the 14th century.
A politically explosive stance.
But before the politics, he has to get educated. The sources say he heads to London first for his early schooling, and then around 1309 he goes to the big leagues.
Oxford. The University of Oxford.
The intellectual heartbeat of England.
For sure. He spends over a decade there studying theology.
This is the place where the smartest minds in Christendom came to debate the nature of God, reality, logic, everything. And this is where we run into his first major contradiction. He earns a nickname that has stuck with him for 700 years, Venerabilis Inceptor.
The Venerable Beginner.
Now I have to ask, is that shade? It sounds like calling someone a distinguished amateur or the perpetual student.
It does sound a bit backhanded, doesn't it? But it's actually a technical term that tells us a lot about his situation.
Okay, break it down for me.
In the medieval university system, to become a regent master, which is basically a tenured professor with the full authority to teach you, you had to jump through an incredible number of hoops.
So it was a long process.
Very long. You had to attend lectures for years, participate in public disputations, and lecture on the Bible yourself. William did all of that. He finished all the requirements for a master's degree in theology.
So he did the work, but he didn't get the job.
He never got the chair. He remained an inceptor, someone at the beginning or the threshold of their mastership. So in title, he was a beginner.
But why? If he did all the work, was it politics? Was he just not good enough?
Oh, he was too good. That was the problem. He was too smart, and his ideas were too dangerous for the establishment.
And this all came to a head over a textbook, of all things.
Yes, the standard requirement for an aspiring theologian was to write a commentary on a book called The Sentences by Peter Lombard.
Okay, let's pause on the sentences. I kept seeing this in the notes. What exactly is this book? It sounds incredibly important.
It was the textbook of the Middle Ages. Think of it as a massive 4-volume collection of opinions from the Church Fathers Augustine, Jerome, all the greats on every theological topic imaginable. The Trinity, creation, sin, the sacraments.
So it was like a master anthology of Christian thought.
Exactly. And if you wanted to prove you were ready to teach, you had to write a massive analysis of this book. It was your PhD thesis, your bar exam, and your first book deal all rolled into one.
Everyone who is anyone did it.
Thomas Aquinas did it, Bonaventure did it, Duns Scotus did it. It was the rite of passage.
And William did it.
He did. But when he handed in his commentary, the reaction wasn't applause. It was shock and horror in some corners.
Why? What did he say?
You have to remember, the dominant intellectual vibe at Oxford was this heavy, complex synthesis of faith and reason. They were trying to build a perfect logical system where Greek philosophy, especially Aristotle, proved Catholic theology.
A grand, unified theory of everything.
Precisely. And William's commentary took a sledgehammer to that entire project. He was arguing for a much simpler, more direct way of thinking. He was criticizing the old guard.
So he's the grad student who writes a thesis saying everything you professors are teaching is wrong.
Pretty much. He was tearing down the arguments of men like Duns Scotus, who was an absolute legend at Oxford. He was seen as the subtle doctor, this master of intricate arguments. And Occam comes along and basically says, this is all needlessly complicated.
Yeah, the faculty must have been furious.
They didn't know what to do with him. His ideas were considered unorthodox.
Yeah.
He wasn't just coloring outside the lines, he was ripping up the coloring book.
And in the medieval world, being unorthodox isn't just about getting a bad grade. It's dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. It could end your career or even your life.
Yeah.
And in 1324, the academic politics spilled over into real-world danger. This is where the story shifts from a university drama to a legal thriller.
He gets summoned.
He's ordered to appear before the papal court in Avignon, France, to defend himself.
And just for context, you might be wondering, why Avignon? We usually associate the Pope with Rome.
Right, the Vatican. But not in this century. This is the era of the Avignon papacy.
The so-called Babylonian captivity of the church.
Exactly. The popes had relocated to France, essentially under the thumb of the French monarchy. It was a time of massive corruption, intrigue, and opulence. So here comes this friar from Surrey, dressed in a rough gray robe, walking into the most luxurious court in Europe to defend his mind.
And the charge is heresy.
Technically, it was an investigation into the orthodoxy of his writings. The Chancellor of Oxford at the time, a man named John Lutterell, who really seemed to have a personal vendetta against William, went to Avignon, specifically to prosecute him.
His own boss turned on him.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Lutterell presented a list of 56 statements from William's books that he claimed were dangerous errors.
So William is under house arrest in Avignon. He's there for years, waiting for a committee of theologians to pick apart his life's work. It must have been terrifying.
Incredibly dangerous. You're completely at the mercy of this court. But here is the plot twist. While William is sitting there dealing with his philosophy trial, waiting for a verdict that may never come.
He gets drafted into a completely different war.
Yes. This is the part of the story that just seems unbelievable. He gets pulled into a bigger fight by his boss, the head of the whole Franciscan order.
Michael of Cesena, the Minister General of the Franciscans.
Exactly. He shows up in Avignon, and Michael is in deep, deep trouble too.
Over this issue of poverty, right?
Yes, it all comes back to that. The Franciscans claimed that Jesus and the apostles owned nothing. No property, no money. They just used what they needed to survive. This was the doctrine of apostolic poverty.
And this was the core of their identity.
It was everything to them. Now, the Pope at the time, John XXII, absolutely hated this idea.
Why? I mean, why did the Pope care so much about monks not owning things? Shouldn't the Pope be into poverty and holiness?
You would think so. But Pope John was a lawyer by training, a brilliant administrator, and he was very focused on the temporal power and wealth of the church. He looked at the Franciscans and saw a massive threat.
A threat how?
The implications were political. If Jesus owned nothing, and the church is supposed to represent Jesus on earth,
Then the church shouldn't own anything either.
exactly. No palaces in Avignon, no vast land holdings, no armies, no political power. The Franciscan view was a direct threat to the wealth and sovereignty of the papacy.
I see. It's an attack on his entire business model.
Precisely. So Pope John XXII issues a series of papal bulls official decrees attacking the doctrine. He declared that the idea that Jesus of the apostles owned nothing was heretical.
Wait. He made it a heresy to say Jesus was poor?
Effectively, yes. He attacked the rule of St. Francis, the very foundation of their order. He was trying to crush them.
So Michael Cecina is in Avignon to fight this, and he sees William.
He sees the smartest guy he knows, a brilliant logician who happens to already be there. So he goes to William and says, "William, I need you to look at this. Read the Pope's bulls and tell me if they stand up to theology and scripture."
That is a dangerous assignment. You were already on trial for your own ideas, and now you're being asked to grade the Pope's homework.
William was reluctant at first, according to the sources. But he's a Franciscan. This is an attack on his order. So he spends weeks, maybe months, locked away, just reading these papal documents.
And what does he find?
He comes to a conclusion that probably made his blood run cold. He concludes that the Pope is not just wrong.
Not just a bad theologian.
No. Much, much worse. He concludes that Pope John XXII is a heretic.
Whoa, he decides the Pope's is the heretic.
Yes, William argued that by denying the poverty of Christ, the Pope was contradicting Scripture and the clear teachings of previous popes. And in William's mind, and this is key to his character, truth trumps authority. Always.
So if a Pope contradicts Scripture, he isn't the Pope anymore.
He forfeits his authority. He becomes a false Pope, an enemy of the faith.
That is, bold doesn't cover it. That is suicidal, calling the Pope a heretic while you are essentially his prisoner in his own city.
It was. They knew at that moment that if they stayed in Avignon after reaching that conclusion, they would have been arrested, tried, and burned at the stake. No question.
So they had to get out.
They had to run for their lives. So on the night of May 26, 1328, they make their move.
The Great Escape.
William of Ockham, Michael of Cecina, and a handful of other leading Franciscans slip out of the Franciscan convent under cover of darkness. They flee the city, they race to the docks, and find a small boat to take them to a galley waiting offshore.
They're on the run from the most powerful man in Europe.
A full-blown extraction. And they head straight for the one man who has a big enough army to protect them.
Louis I of Bavaria, the Holy Roman Emperor.
Who, conveniently, was also in a massive knockdown, drag-out fight with the Pope over who was the true ruler of Christendom.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
The ultimate example. They reach Louis' court in Munich, and legend has it that William meets the emperor and says one of the hardest lines in history.
I love this line.
"Defend me with the sword, and I will defend you with the pen."
That is cinematic. It's like something out of Game of Thrones.
And he lived up to it. William spent the rest of his life in exile in Munich under the emperor's protection. He was officially excommunicated by the Pope on June 6, 1328.
Kicked out of the church, eternal damnation, the whole works.
But he didn't stop. He unleashed a torrent of writing, a storm of political treatises, arguing that the Pope was a criminal, a heretic, and a fraud who needed to be deposed.
It's important to clarify, though, was he excommunicated because of his philosophy? The razor stuff?
No, and that's a crucial distinction for the listener. That's a common misconception. He was excommunicated for his disobedience, for fleeing Avignon without permission, and for his political stance on apostolic poverty.
So for his actions, not his core ideas about reality.
Exactly. His actual philosophy, the nominalism we're about to discuss, was controversial, but it was never officially condemned as heresy by the church.
So he's a political outlaw, but his ideas are still in play, and this is where we need to pivot, right? From the political thriller to the philosophy that changed everything.
Exactly. While all this drama is unfolding, William had already laid down a system of thought that was going to change the world. We need to get into the deep part of the deep dive. We need to talk about nominalism.
This is the big idea, and I want to take this slowly, because when you read about nominalism in textbooks, it can get very abstract very quickly.
It can, but it solves a very real problem. And to understand Occam, you have to understand the problem of universals. It's a debate that had been raging for centuries.
Okay, lay it out for me. What is the problem of universals?
The question is this: do general concepts exist as real things out in the world? Or are there only individual things?
Okay, that still sounds a bit abstract. Give me an example.
Let's use a concrete example. Picture 2 red apples sitting on a table.
Okay, I have 2 red apples.
Now, we look at them and we say they share a quality, redness, and they share a nature, appleness. They're both red and they're both apples.
Simple enough.
The philosophical question is, does redness exist as a real, independent thing? Is there a universal redness floating around in the universe that both of these apples are participating in? Same for appleness.
Most people today would say, no, it's just a color. The apples are red. It's a property they have.
Right. But in the Middle Ages, the dominant school of thought, the realists, who were followers of Plato and a modified Aristotle, said yes. They believed that redness or appleness or humanity were real universal forms or essences.
So there's a ghostly perfect apple somewhere that makes my apple an apple.
In a sense, yes. Or at least a shared real extramental essence. They believed that for two things to be similar, they had to share a connection to a real existing universal. The universal was the metaphysical glue of reality.
They built their whole worldview on this.
The whole thing, humanity was a real thing. The church was a real mystical thing, separate from the individual people in it. Justice was a real form.
And Occam comes along and says,
Garbage.
just blunt.
Occam was a radical empiricist. He trusted his senses. He looked at the table and said, I see one apple. I see another apple. That's it. That's all that's real on that table.
So what are these universals then? What is redness?
He argued that universals like redness, humanity, dogness are just names. The Latin word for name is nomen. That's where we get the term nominalism.
They are just labels we invent.
Exactly. He said they are concepts in our minds. Our brain sees two things that look alike. And to be efficient, it creates a category, a mental shortcut, a word to group them together. But that category has no reality outside your skull.
So there is no humanity floating in the ether. There are just, what, 8 billion individual humans?
That's the Occamist view. There are only individuals. To be precise, he's sometimes called a conceptualist or a terminist because he saw these universals as mental concepts or terms in language. But the basic idea is the same. They're not out there.
This seems like common sense to us today, but why was this so dangerous back then? Why did people get so angry about it?
Because if you destroy universals, you destabilize the entire structure of medieval society and theology.
How so?
Well, think about it. If humanity isn't real, do we all share a common human nature derived from Adam? Does original sin work the same way? If the church isn't a real mystical entity, what is it?
Just a collection of guys in robes.
Just a bunch of fallible individuals. It strips the mystique away. It questions the very basis of institutional authority. It individualizes everything.
And it forces you to look at the specific singular thing right in front of you.
Exactly. And this brings us to the tool he used to slice away those unnecessary universals. The razor.
Occam's razor. Now, you mentioned earlier that there's a bit of a Mandela effect with the famous quote.
Right. If you ask someone to quote Occam's razor, they'll say, entities must not be multiplied beyond necessity.
Entia non sunt multiplicanda sine necessitated. Sounds very profound.
It is a great Latin phrase, but William never wrote it.
He never said it.
Not in those exact words. That specific phrasing was invented much later, in the 17th century, by an Irish Franciscan who was a follower of his philosophy.
So what did Occam actually say?
He said the same thing in different ways throughout his work. A more accurate, though less catchy, version is something like, nothing ought to be posited without a reason given, unless it is self-evident, known by experience, or proved by the authority of sacred scripture.
That is a bit wordier. Nothing ought to be posited without a reason given.
Right, but the core idea is parsimony, the principle of parsimony.
Parsimony, meaning frugality, like being cheap.
Yes, but in a philosophical sense. Stinginess with your concepts. William was obsessed with ontological parsimony. Ontology is the study of what exists, the furniture of the universe. William wanted to keep the inventory list of things that exist as short as absolutely possible.
So going back to the apples, the realist says, okay, on my list of existing things, I have apple A, apple B, and the universal form of redness. That's 3 things.
Right, and Occam comes in with his razor and says, I see apple A and apple B. They just happen to look like each other. The redness is just a description, not a thing. He shaves off the universal.
So the rule is, if you can explain a phenomenon without inventing a new invisible entity, you must do so.
You must. It's the ultimate decluttering method for philosophy. Does this abstract concept spark joy? No. Throw it out.
It's Marie Kondo for metaphysics.
Essentially. And he used this to attack the bad physics of his day. For example, the Aristotelians thought that when you throw a rock, it has a quality called motion added to it, like it's wearing a coat of motion.
Motion is a thing.
To them, yes. Occam said, no, that's absurd. Motion isn't a thing. Motion is just the rock being in one place and then being in another place later. It's a description of change, not an entity.
He's stripping away the magic.
He is. And that's why Bertrand Russell and modern scientists love him. He paved the way for the scientific method. Stop assuming there are hidden essences or forms or motion spirits governing nature.
Right. Just look at the data. What is the simplest explanation that fits the facts we can observe?
But here is the paradox I found in the notes. William wasn't a modern secular scientist. He was a devout Franciscan friar. He believed in God, angels, miracles, the soul.
All of it.
So how does the razor fit with religion? If you shave away everything you can't see or prove by experience, don't you shave away God?
That is the big question. And this is where it gets absolutely fascinating, because it's the opposite of what you'd expect. We tend to think that logic and religion are opposites. But for William, using the razor was a way to protect faith.
How does that work?
He was a fideist.
Fideist. That comes from fides, the Latin word for faith. Exactly. He believed that faith and reason were totally separate lanes. He argued, in a direct challenge to someone like Thomas Aquinas, that you cannot prove God exists using logic or reason.
You can't prove God with logic. I thought that was the whole point of scholastic theology.
That was Aquinas' project. The 5 ways, the logical proofs for God. Occam thought that was a huge mistake. He said, human logic is limited to what we can see and experience in the world. God is, by definition, outside of that system.
So trying to prove God with logic is like trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon?
Perfect analogy. He thought that if you try to trap God in a logical syllogism, you are bringing God down to your level. You are insulting him. You're making God subject to the rules of human reason.
So he separated them to save God from human limitations.
Exactly. His position was, only faith gives us access to theological truths. You believe in God because it's revealed in Scripture, and you choose to believe, not because you solved a math problem.
That actually makes sense. It liberates faith from having to be logical in a human sense.
And it liberates reason to do its own thing, to study the world as it is. But it also leads to his most radical theological idea, voluntarism.
Voluntarism. From voluntas' will, the power of the will.
Specifically, God's will. Occam believed that God is absolutely terrifyingly free. God is omnipotent. He can do anything that isn't the logical contradiction, like making a square circle. But aside from that, anything goes.
And this is where we get the famous and honestly kind of bizarre donkey example.
Yes, this is classic Occam. It's so provocative. He was debating God's absolute power, and he said, look, the way the world works isn't necessary. God didn't have to make it this way. Gravity didn't have to work this way. Humans didn't have to have 2 legs.
It was all a choice.
A completely free choice. And to prove his point, he takes on the incarnation. He says if God had wanted to, he could have become incarnate as a donkey or an ox. Or even a donkey and a man at the same time.
God could have been a donkey.
Theoretically, yes.
I can just imagine the other theologians flipping tables when he said that. It sounds so blasphemous.
They were horrified. Of course it does. But William's point was a serious philosophical one. Who are you to tell God he can't be a donkey?
Right.
If you say God can't do that because it's undignified, you are putting your human standards of dignity above God's absolute power. You are saying God is limited by your idea of what's proper. Occam refused to do that. For him, God's freedom is the ultimate reality.
This actually has a huge impact on science, doesn't it? Because if the world could be anything...
Then you can't just sit in your armchair and think about how the world must work.
What do you mean?
The Greeks and the early scholastics loved to do that. They'd say circles are the most perfect shape, so planets must move in perfect circles. It's an argument from reason.
And Occam says...
Occam says no. God could have made them move in squares if he wanted to. There's no must about it. The only way to find out how they move is to go look.
Empiricism. You have to observe the world because the world is contingent. It's a choice God made, not a logical necessity.
Precisely. By emphasizing God's absolute freedom, he unintentionally created the philosophical justification for experimental science. You have to test reality to see what it actually is, because logic alone can't predict God's free choices.
That is a massive aha moment. So by saying logic can't explain God, he actually freed up logic to look at the physical world.
And he freed up faith to just be faith. It's a brilliant, if controversial, separation of powers.
So let's zoom out a bit. We have the fugitive friar in Munich. He's dismantled metaphysics with his razor. He's separated faith and reason. Now let's look at how he applied this to politics, because you mentioned he's a pioneer of the separation of church and state.
He is. And again, it comes directly from his personal situation and his philosophical principles. Just as he separated logic from faith, he wanted to separate the spiritual rule from the earthly rule.
Which, in the 1300s, was not the vibe. The Pope claimed plenitudo potestatis, fullness of power. He was the CEO of the world.
He was the spiritual and temporal ruler of everything. The Pope claimed he could depose kings, run empires, and that all earthly power flowed from God through him to the rulers.
And Occam, writing under the protection of the emperor, had a different idea.
A very different idea. He went back to Scripture, specifically a passage in 2 Timothy where St. Paul says a soldier of God shouldn't get entangled in civilian affairs.
A pretty clear line.
Occam used that to argue that the Pope's job is purely spiritual. Preach the gospel, administer the sacraments, care for the souls of the faithful. That's it. He has zero business running a government, owning a palace, or commanding an army.
So he's telling the Emperor Louis, you don't answer to the Pope on political matters. Your power doesn't come from the church.
Right. But here is the really radical part.
Yeah.
He then has to answer the question, where does the emperor's power come from then?
If not from God through the Pope.
Occam argued that after the fall of man, God gave humanity as a whole the right and the reason to set up their own governments and elect their own rulers to maintain peace and order.
The people choose.
In a way, yes. He argued that political power comes from the consent of the governed. The ruler has a job to serve the common good. If the ruler fails at that job, or if, say, the Pope becomes a heretic and a criminal, the community has the right to remove him.
That sounds like the seeds of democracy, or at least the social contract of Locke and Rousseau.
It's a direct precursor. You see echoes of Occam and Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, and eventually in the American Founding Fathers. The idea that power is a loan from the people, not a divine right of kings or popes. It's an astonishingly modern political theory.
And he also had to dive into legal theory, right? To save the Franciscans from that poverty trap.
The property debate. This is really interesting for anyone interested in law or economics. Remember, the Pope said, if you eat the apple, you own it. It's a legal checkmate.
How did Occam get out of it?
He had to lawyer his way out. He developed the concept of usus facti, which means factual use, or use in fact.
Okay, what does that mean?
He argued that you can have a natural right to use something to survive, like eating food or wearing a robe, without having a legal right or title to it. He separated the physical act of using from the legal concept of owning.
Like being a guest in someone's house. I can sit on the couch, I can drink a glass of water, but I don't own the couch or the glass.
That's a perfect modern analogy.
Mm.
He argued the Franciscans were permanent guests in God's world. They used things, but they claimed no legal power over them, no right to sue someone for them, no right to sell them. This whole debate forced him to define what rights actually are.
And what was his definition?
He moved the definition of a right from being some kind of cosmic entitlement to being a specific legal power granted by society. Again, he's making things concrete, observable, and secular. He's laying the groundwork for modern legal and economic theory.
It's amazing. We're talking about a guy in the 1340s in exile, coming up with theories of property rights and the consent of the governed. He's centuries ahead of schedule.
He really was. And we should briefly mention his contributions to pure logic, because he was doing things that look remarkably like modern computer science.
Do tell.
Well, in his massive Summa-Logicae, he wrote down logical formulas that define how and or statements work when you negate them. Today, in any intro to logic or computer programming course, we call them De Morgan's laws.
Wait, I learned De Morgan's laws in a logic class. Those are named after Augustus De Morgan, a 19th century British mathematician.
They are. He gets the credit because he formalized them using modern notation in the 19th century. But Occam had written them down, in words, in the 14th century. He was essentially coding logic before computers existed.
That is wild. Absolutely wild.
And it gets weirder. He played around with ternary logic. Most logic we use is binary. True or false, 0 or 1. That's the basis of all computing. Occam explored a system with 3 truth values, true, false, and some kind of middle indeterminate value.
A 3-valued logic.
Yes, and that's something mathematical logic didn't really return to in a serious way until the 19th and 20th centuries.
Right.
He was just on another level.
And I also saw in the outline that he had a beef with time, or at least how people thought about time.
Yes, another application of the razor. The medievals had a very complicated view of duration. They thought there was time for us mortals on Earth, which is measured by change and motion.
Okay.
Then there was eternity for God, which is completely outside of time all at once.
Makes sense.
And then, because they loved creating categories for everything, they had a weird middle thing called the avum.
Avum? What on earth is that?
It was a special time measure just for angels.
Angel time, you're kidding.
I am not. It was supposed to be somewhere between our time and God's eternity. It had a beginning, but it didn't have change or succession in the same way our time does.
It was.
Yeah, while it was angel time.
And Occam said,
Razor it. Unnecessary entity. He said it's nonsense. There is only one measure of duration for all created things. Time. And it is shared by all of creation. Angels, humans, rocks. We are all on the same clock. Eternity is for God alone.
it's a democratization of the universe. We are all in the same boat, chronologically.
Exactly. It simplifies the cosmos. It's classic Occam.
So, William of Ockham dies around 1347 in Munich, right?
Yes, the sources point to April of 1347. And grimly enough, he probably died of the Black Death. The great plague that he had watched approaching from the east finally reached Munich and caught him.
Wow. He died still excommunicated, still a rebel.
Yes, buried in a Franciscan church in Munich, a fugitive to the end.
But the ideas didn't stay buried with him.
Not at all. In fact, they exploded across Europe. His way of thinking, the via moderna or modern way, became hugely influential. And there's a direct line to the Protestant Reformation.
To Martin Luther.
Absolutely. Martin Luther actually called Occam my master and my dear master. He said he belonged to the Occamist party. He read him avidly.
Why? Luther was a German monk almost 200 years later. What did he see in this medieval English friar?
He saw the whole toolkit for challenging the papacy. Occam denied papal infallibility long before it was an official doctrine to deny. Occam argued that church councils could make mistakes because they're just made of fallible men.
Which means institutions aren't guaranteed to be right.
Exactly. And most importantly, Occam argued that Scripture is the ultimate authority, and that a Christian is bound to believe Scripture over a pope's decree if they conflict.
That sounds exactly like Luther's argument at the Diet of Worms.
It is. This foreshadows Luther's core doctrine of sola scriptura, Scripture alone. So the fugitive friar of the 14th century planted the bomb that blew up the unity of the Western Church 2 centuries later.
And for the literature fans listening, there is one more massive direct legacy.
The Name of the Rose.
Umberto Eco's masterpiece.
If you haven't read the book or seen the movie with Sean Connery, you absolutely have to. The main character is a brilliant Franciscan friar named William of Baskerville.
Baskerville, obviously referencing Sherlock Holmes.
Right. But the character is a direct, loving homage to William of Ockham. He's an English Franciscan. He's in trouble with the Pope in Avignon. He's a nominalist philosopher. And he uses logic and empirical observation to solve a series of murders in a medieval abbey. He is literally Occam as a detective.
If you think about it, Occam is the original detective. Sherlock Holmes owes him a royalty check.
Without a doubt. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. That is pure Occam. Shave away the impossible assumptions until you are left with the hard fact.
It is a shortcut to being well-informed indeed. So let's try to recap this incredible life. We have a man who was a beginner, who never got his degree.
A friar sworn to poverty who ended up shaping the modern laws of property.
A fugitive hiding from the Pope who wrote the playbook for modern secular politics.
And a deeply religious theologian whose logic drives the scientific method.
A life of contradictions held together by one driving principle.
Simplicity. Truth. Strip away the fake stuff, the complex theories, the institutional power, and deal with what is real, what is right in front of you.
So what does this all mean for us today? We usually end with a takeaway, but today I want to leave the listener with a question based on Occam's voluntarism.
Go for it.
Occam believed that the laws of nature aren't necessary. Gravity doesn't have to pull down. The speed of light doesn't have to be constant. It happens that way because God wills it, moment by moment. The universe is contingent. It could have been a universe where God became incarnate as a donkey.
It could have been. The laws could be different tomorrow.
So here's the question. How does that change the way we look at science today? We often think of the laws of physics as these rigid, unchangeable, almost divine truths. But if we view them through Occam's lens, they are just observations. They are just how it happens to be right now. Does that make the universe feel more fragile to you, or does it make it feel more miraculous?
That is a deep thought to end on. It certainly makes you appreciate the stability we do have. It's not guaranteed by some abstract logic. It's a gift of existence. And it reinforces his main point. We have to open our eyes and look at it to truly understand it. We can't just assume.
Something to mull over. And the next time you are faced with a complex problem or a conspiracy theory with 12 different moving parts, remember our friend William of Ockham.
Shave away the water fairies, look for the simplest explanation.
Don't multiply entities beyond necessity. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
We'll see you next time.